In 1980, the New York Times ran a headline that sent shockwaves through the music industry. The headline read, "Solar could be the Motown of the 80s. They weren't wrong." Solar Records, an acronym for Sound of Los Angeles Records, was born from the most electrifying dance floor on American television. Dick Griffey, the talent coordinator for Soul Train, had watched thousands of young black artists perform on that show. He knew what the world wanted before the world knew it wanted it.
When you love someone, it's natural not to matter.
In 1977, he bought out his partner Don Cornelius, renamed the label, and unleashed a sound that would define an entire decade of R&B. Not the polished, controlled perfection of Motown. Not the raw, gospel-drenched fire of Stax. Something new, something West Coast. Funky rhythms, disco pulse, synthesizers that shimmered like the California sun, and voices that moved like the dancers who inspired them. By the time the 1980s peaked, Solar had produced more consecutive R&B chart hits than any independent black-owned label in American music history. Today, we're counting down the 10 Solar record stars who rewrote the rules of R&B. Every story is verified, and every single one of them hits different when you know the truth behind it. Let's go. Number 10, Carrie Lucas, I Gotta Keep Dancing, 1977. She wasn't supposed to be a recording artist. Carrie Lucas, born October 1st, 1945, in Carmel, California, was singing background vocals on a whisper session at the newly formed Soul Train Records when the label's founder walked in and stopped everything. Dick Griffey had never heard a voice quite like hers, natural, warm, effortless. He asked her to sing him something original. She played him a demo of a song she had written herself called Fairy Tales. He signed her on the spot. Within months, she and Griffey were married, and Carrie Lucas became the only female solo artist ever signed to Solar Records, and the woman who helped build the very label she recorded for.
Come on and dance with me, baby.
Her debut single, I Gotta Keep Dancing, came out in 1977 on the predecessor Soul Train Records label. Written by her cousin Malcolm Anthony, it was a disco firecracker. Pure joy, pure groove, pure Los Angeles.
I'm gonna.
It raced to number 1 on the club charts nationally. It reached number 64 on the Billboard Hot 100 for an unknown debut artist on a brand new independent label. That was extraordinary. The backing vocalists on the record, the Whispers, the same group she had been singing backgrounds for. And the song did something else that nobody planned. It became the foundation stone, the proof that Solar's sound, funky, lush, dance floor ready, could find a mainstream pop audience. Carrie Lucas went on to release 6 albums over 7 years. She co-wrote songs for the Whispers. She co-produced alongside the label's biggest names. She was, in every sense, the first star in the Solar Galaxy.
It's all I want to do.
Her daughter, Carolyn Griffey, later helped relaunch Solar Records in the UK. The family legacy continues. But it all started with a background vocalist who walked into the right room at the right moment and refused to stay in the background.
So good, so good.
Number 9, Dynasty, I Don't Want to Be a Freak, But I Can't Help Myself, 1979. When Dick Griffey needed a group he could build from scratch, completely on his own terms, he called in his most trusted weapon, Leon Silvers III. Leon was one of 9 musical siblings from the legendary Silvers family, a gospel-rooted, chart-crossing Los Angeles dynasty that had been recording since the early 1970s. As a producer, Leon had one gift above all others. He understood the science of a hit, melody structure, groove architecture, the precise moment a bass line needed to shift. He was solar's in-house genius. Griffey and Leon co-created Dynasty in 1979, essentially building the group from their combined musical vision before finding the people to fill it. Keyboardist Kevin Spencer, vocalist Nedra Beard, and vocalist Linda Carriere formed the core lineup. No touring history, no organic origin story, just a calculated, brilliant studio creation. Their debut album, Your Piece of the Rock, came out in 1979. The first single was a 7-minute, 20-second slow burn dance track called I Don't Want to Be a Freak, But I Can't Help Myself. That title says everything you need to know about the record. It hit number 20 on the UK singles chart. It became a club anthem on both sides of the Atlantic, and it proved that Solar could compete in the international disco marketplace. Their second album, Adventures in the Land of Music, produced the group's only top 10 R&B hit, I've Just Begun to Love You, peaking at number 6 in 1980. Dynasty stayed with Solar through 6 full albums, all the way to 1988. They were never superstars, but they were the label's experimental playground. The act Griffey and Silvers used to test ideas before handing the best ones to the bigger artists. And I Don't Want to Be a Freak is still dancing on floors 60 years later. Number 8, Lakeside, Fantastic Voyage, 1980. They came from the funkiest city in America. Dayton, Ohio has produced more significant funk bands per square mile than anywhere else on earth.
Just slide, slippity slide.
Ohio players, Zap, Slave, Heatwave, and Lakeside, a 9-person collective that was, in the words of Soul Tracks, truly unique in that it essentially consisted of 2 groups, a stand-up 4-man vocal group and a full-on 4-vocal funk band. They formed around 1969 and 1970 from 2 Dayton groups, the Nomads and the Young Underground. They won a talent contest that sent them to Chicago to record for Curtis Mayfield's Curtum label. The session never materialized. They moved to Los Angeles. They signed with ABC Records. ABC went under. They were running out of options. Dick Griffey signed them to Solar in 1978. Their first Solar single, It's All the Way Live, hit number 4 on the R&B chart in 1978. Progress, but the real breakthrough was still coming. In 1980, Lakeside recorded Fantastic Voyage, their 4th album. The title track was a rolling, irresistible funk odyssey, lush harmonies over a thick, bubbling groove. Horns punching through the mix, a lead vocal that sounded like an invitation to leave everything behind and just get on the boat. On January 25th, 1981, Fantastic Voyage hit number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart. It stayed there for 2 weeks. it crossed over to number 55 pop, their only Billboard Hot 100 entry. The album went gold. In 1994, Coolio sampled the track for his own fantastic Voyage, and that version went to number 3 pop and number 1 R&B. The Lakeside original was in the DNA of the 90s, from a contest in Chicago that never paid out to a gold album and a chart topper at Solar. Lakeside's Voyage was anything but fantastic until it suddenly gloriously was. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 7. Carrie Lucas label mates, The Deal, Two Occasions, 1987. In 1981, a group of young musicians from Cincinnati, Ohio formed a band and called it The Deal. The name sounded like The Deal, and in hindsight it was the most accurately named band in R&B history. Because hidden inside The Deal, 2 members in particular was possibly the greatest record-making deal in the history of modern music. Their names were Kenneth Edmonds and Antonio Reid. You know them as Babyface and L.A. Reid. The future founders of LaFace Records, the men behind Tony Braxton, TLC, Usher, Outkast, the architects of the entire 1990s R&B sound. And in the early 1980s, they were 2 young Cincinnati musicians trying to get signed. Dick Griffey brought them to Solar in 1983. That's day and night. Their debut single, Body Talk, hit number 3 on the R&B chart, a solid start. But the real moment came in 1987, their 3rd album, Eyes of a Stranger, produced entirely by L.A. Reid and Babyface. In my heart, I know my love lasting. The 2nd single was a ballad called Two Occasions. Babyface sang the lead, the only song on the album where he did. His voice, already impossibly warm, riding a spare, gentle production that felt like a late-night conversation rather than a performance. Two Occasions hit number 4 on the R&B chart and cracked the Billboard Hot 100 Top 10. But here is the deeper story. Immediately before recording that album, L.A. Reid and Babyface had also just produced Rock Steady for their Solar label mates, The Whispers, giving the veteran group their first number 1 single in years. The Whispers, The Deal, 2 Solar acts, 1 production team, and the beginning of a creative empire that would reshape R&B for the next 2 decades. They left Solar, they started LaFace, and the rest is the history of the 1990s. Number 6, Dynasty's sibling act, Klymaxx, I Miss You, 1985. Here is something that has never been fully celebrated. Klymaxx was the first all-female R&B band in history to write, produce, and play their own instruments on a platinum-selling album. Not a girl group with session players behind them. Not a vocal group with a production team calling the shots. An actual band. Every woman playing an instrument. Every woman writing songs. Every woman in control. Playing tricks on me. Bernadette Cooper, the drummer and creative force, formed Klymaxx in Los Angeles in 1979.
Just can't be me, just can't be me.
She assembled a lineup that would eventually include guitarist Cheryl Cooley, bassist and vocalist Joyce Fenderella, Irby, keyboardist Lynn Malsby, and lead vocalist Lorena Porter Shelby. They signed with Solar in 1981. Dick Griffey's exact words when he heard their audition, which featured an original song, were reportedly immediate recognition that this was something different.
Is it done and over?
Their first Solar album stiffed. The label's distribution problems, which also hurt the Whispers and Shalamar around the same time, hampered their early releases.
Easy to see.
But here is where Solar's structure actually worked in their favor. When the label set up its subsidiary Constellation Records, Klymaxx moved over, and for the 1984 album meeting in the ladies' room, they brought in Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis as co-producers. The resulting album was a revelation. The Men All Pause hit number 5 R&B. Meeting in the Ladies' Room hit number 4 R&B. And then I Miss You, written solely by Lynn Malsby, a slow, aching ballad about longing, hit number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 in December 1985. 29 weeks on the chart, their biggest hit. The album went gold, certified by the RIA. They were the first, and they remain one of the most underrated groups of the entire decade. But I Miss You is the kind of record that makes you pull over your car just to finish listening to it. Number 5, Midnight Star, Freak-A-Zoid, 1983. There is a word in the American vocabulary today, Freak-A-Zoid, that traces directly back to a laboratory at Kentucky State University.
Are you ready to jam?
In 1976, two brothers, Reggie Calloway on trumpet and Vincent Calloway on trombone, were students at Kentucky State when they formed Midnight Star. Belinda Lipscomb sang lead. The band grew to 9 members, all musically trained, all classically educated in theory and composition. They signed with RCA first. Their debut album in 1980 went nowhere. They moved to Solar in 1982. Dick Griffey and the Solar Machine believed in them. Even when their first 2 Solar albums scored modest R&B hits, Hotspot, I've Been Watching You, but nothing transformative. Then in 1983, Reggie Calloway wrote a song that some members of the band weren't sure they should record. It was called Freak-A-Zoid, and it was a leap into techno-funk. The art of mixing electronic synthesizer rhythms with the organic groove of instruments actually played by human beings. The sound was spaceship cold and street warm at the same time. Other members were hesitant. It was a new direction, a risk. Reggie convinced them. Freak-A-Zoid hit number 2 on the R&B chart in the summer of 1983. It didn't cross the Pop Top 40, but it pushed their album No Parking on the dance floor over the double platinum mark, 2 million copies. The album also included Wet My Whistle, No Parking on the Dance Floor, and a quiet storm ballad called Slow Jam, co-written by a young songwriter named Kenneth Edmonds, Babyface, before LaFace, before any of it. 1996, The Simpsons had Apu sing the chorus of Freak-A-Zoid. That's cultural permanence. In 2022, the Calloway brothers were inducted into the Cincinnati Black Music Walk of Fame. 39 years after, a song some of them didn't want to record made them legends. Number 4, Shalamar, A Night to Remember, 1982. Before there was Michael Jackson's Moonwalk at Motown 25 in March 1983, there was Jeffrey Daniel on Top Ups in June 1982. 9 months earlier, same move, different artist, and almost nobody in America knew it. Shalamar was created, almost literally from thin air, by Dick Griffey and Don Cornelius in 1975.
So now my love to you, baby.
The original group was just session singers assembled to record a disco medley of early Motown hits called Uptown Festival. It became a surprise hit. Griffey realized he needed actual real performers. He looked at the dancers on Soul Train's floor, the best in the country, and plucked 2 of them, Jody Watley and Jeffrey Daniel.
I'm gonna make this a night to remember.
After an original lineup shuffle, Howard Hewitt joined as lead vocalist in 1979. Producer Leon Silvers III came aboard the same year, and the classic Shalamar, Hewitt, Watley, Daniel was born.
Get ready tonight.
They scored Solar's second million seller with The Second Time Around in 1979. Then came a string of hits, Make That Move, I Owe You One, A Night to Remember. That last one, from their 1982 album Friends, was written by Nidra Beard of Dynasty and Charmaine Silvers of the Silvers family. Jody Watley and Howard Hewitt shared lead vocals. The chemistry between them was electric and complicated, and completely audible in every bar. When Shalamar performed the song on Top of the Pops in June 1982, Jeffrey Daniel stepped forward during the instrumental break and did something British television had never seen. He slid backwards while walking forwards. He floated, the Moonwalk, on live UK television, June 1982. Jeffrey Daniel has confirmed in multiple interviews that he had been teaching the move privately for years, and that Michael Jackson later approached him directly to be taught. Daniel became Jackson's personal choreography consultant.
They took a back on love, but that's what drove you straight to me.
The move that defined an era at Motown 25, it was born in a Shalamar performance on a British television stage 9 months before the world called it Michael Jackson's. Number 3, The Whispers, and The Beat Goes On, 1979. On November 24th, 1979, The Whispers performed a song on Soul Train. Nobody in the audience fully understood what they were watching. The Whispers, born in Los Angeles in 1964 as a doo-wop harmony group, had been making music for 15 years by the time they walked onto that stage. 15 years of moderate R&B success, labels that came and went, decades of near misses on the pop chart. But in 1978, Dick Griffey signed them to Solar, and he handed them to his genius producer, Leon Silvers III. What Silvers built for The Whispers was different from anything they had recorded before. Not the smooth, string-laden soul of the early 70s, not pure disco.
Still moving strong.
Something in between, a post-disco groove with an electric backbone, a Latin percussion pulse underneath, and 5-part harmony riding on top of it, all like a wave that refused to break.
And the beat goes on.
The song was called And the Beat Goes On, written by Leon Silvers, Stephen Shockley, and William Shelby.
Like the sweet sound of hit music.
On February 23, 1980, And the Beat Goes On reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart. It stayed there for 5 weeks.
There'll never be an ending.
It crossed over to number 19 pop. It hit number 2 in the United Kingdom. It went number 1 on the dance chart. It was Solar's first million-selling single, the record that proved the label could compete at the very top of pop and R&B simultaneously. Robert Christgau, the legendary Village Voice music critic, gave the Whispers album a B rating, which was high praise from a man who gave the Beatles B pluses. Smash Hits magazine reviewed it. The album hit number 1 on the Billboard Soul LPs chart and number 6 on the Billboard 200. The Whispers had been making records for 15 years, and it took Solar to give them their first million seller. The beat, as the song says, went on and on and on. Number 2, The Whispers. Rock Steady, 1987. 8 years after And the Beat Goes On made the Whispers Solar legends. 2 young members of a Cincinnati band called The Deal walked into the studio and gave them something new.
You are all that I anticipated.
L.A., Reid, and Babyface, still members of The Deal, still officially junior artists on the Solar roster. But Dick Griffey had heard what they were capable of.
It never seemed to be the right time.
And in 1987, he connected them with the Whispers for what would become one of the most important sessions in Solar history.
And we begin to rock.
The song was called Rock Steady, hard-driving new jack swing energy with a classic Whispers warmth underneath it.
Steady, steady rocking all night.
The 5-part harmony that had been their signature since 1964, now riding over a production style that sounded like the future. L.A. Reid's drums, Babyface's chords, the Whispers' irreplaceable voices.
Steady, rocking to the break.
Rock Steady hit number 1 on the R&B chart in 1987, the Whispers' second chart topper, after And the Beat Goes On. It was their highest charting pop single since their early 70s days.
The love wouldn't let it, then you won't get to.
But the deeper significance goes beyond the chart number. This recording was the moment L.A., Reid and Babyface first demonstrated in a fully realized, commercially successful production exactly what they could do when given complete creative control. Months later, they would leave The Deal. They would start their own production company, and then LaFace Records, and then, piece by piece, they would architect the entire sound of 1990s R&B. It started here with The Whispers on Solar Records in 1987. The Whispers' arc at Solar, from And the Beat Goes On in 1979 to Rock Steady in 1987, is one of the great sustained runs in independent label history. 40 chart entries between 1969 and 1997, 2 number ones, a legacy that is still 8 years later completely underrated.
Steady, steady rocking on.
Number 1, Shalamar, The second time around, 1979. In 1975, Dick Griffey assembled session singers to record a disco medley called Uptown Festival, a lovingly crafted remix of early Motown hits. It was the first recording on Soul Train Records. It hit number 25 on the pop chart, and Berry Gordy noticed. Gordy had built Motown. He had controlled black pop music for 2 decades. He recognized in that Shalamar medley what it meant when someone else started doing Motown's greatest hits better than Motown was currently doing.
You know I really love you.
Motown. He was watching a generation change hands. By 1979, the classic Shalamar lineup, Howard Hewitt, Jody Watley, Jeffrey Daniel, was assembled and recording with producer Leon Silver's 3, their million-selling single. The second time around, hit number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 5 on the R&B chart in early 1980. It was Solar's second million-selling single after The Whispers and The Beat Goes On. 2 million sellers inside 12 months. From a label that had existed for barely 3 years. The New York Times published that headline, "Solar could be the Motown of the 80s. They were right, but for reasons that went beyond the chart numbers. Because Solar was doing something Motown had stopped doing. Motown controlled its artists, managed their images, told them how to dress, what to sing, where to go. Solar built stars and let them breathe. Jody Watley left Shalamar in 1983 and won a Grammy for Best New Artist in 1988 as a solo act. Jeffrey Daniel became one of the most sought-after choreographers in the world. Howard Hewitt launched a successful solo gospel and R&B career. The deal gave the world L.A. Reid and Babyface. Midnight Stars Calloway Brothers became in-demand producers for Natalie Cole and Gladys Knight. Klymaxx blazed a trail for all-female R&B bands that still hasn't been properly recognized. Solar Records didn't just end Motown's reign over R&B. It replaced it with something more democratic, more West Coast, more diverse, more forward-looking. Dick Griffey died on September 24, 2010, at the age of 71, after building a label that generated over $89 million in production sales by the year 2000. A man with an $800 idea and a television show full of the world's best dancers. He saw the galaxy before anyone else could see the stars. Soul Train gave America its greatest dance floor. Solar Records gave that dance floor its greatest music. From Carrie Lucas singing backgrounds and becoming the label's first star, to the deal quietly incubating the 2 men who would rebuild R&B from scratch in the 90s. From Jeffrey Daniel teaching the Moonwalk on British television 9 months before Motown 25, to the Whispers scoring their second #1 8 years after their first. This is the story the mainstream music industry never properly told. Solar Records, sound of Los Angeles records, the galaxy that changed R&B forever. Subscribe for more music history that deserves to be heard. And drop your favorite Solar Records track in the comments. Because the beat, it's still going on.